Right, and let's jump into this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi guys, and welcome to GeeK Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. And my special guest today is someone who's been involved with all the legends, from David Bowie to Depeche Mode to Nick Cave and countless others. I'm very happy to introduce Mr. Kevin Paul. How are you doing, Kevin?
Very well, Vaughn. How are you?
Very good. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain fog there. I don't want to sort of go off topic here, but my community now, I've been suffering from long COVID, as they call it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it's terrible. It can just hit you at the wrong moment. So if I have a bit of an Alzheimer's moment here, don't freak out.
No problem.
That's good.
Okay now?
Yeah. Sorry, say that again.
Are you okay now?
Oh no, I'm all good now. Yeah, I'm. It's it never affected me badly, like with respiration. It was just more like a fatigue and brain fog kind of thing. But anyway, it's just one of those things. But listen, I'm so happy to meet you. Thank you for agreeing to do this chat with us today.
You're welcome.
And you're in London as well, is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And so tell us, before we jump into this, as I said, when Lloyd introduced me to you. And I read up about you. As soon as I put you in Google, I recognized you right away because I've read articles on you on Sound on Sound and all kinds of things. And I realized this could be a very, very long chat. But hopefully, if you agree later on to come on for further episodes, I'd be very grateful. But I'd like to really focus it now on your time with your, because we talk about Depeche Mode a lot on this channel, your remixing of the 5.1 surrounds.
Okay.
I think one of the most noticeable credits you have was you were the chief mixing engineer for Mute Records. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I was there. I was at Mute for about 10 years. I started off as a second engineer. Prior to working at Mute, I worked for a studio called Conk Studios, which was owned by the Kinks.
Oh, right.
And Conk used to do a lot of work for Mute in the sort of really in the heyday of Mute, actually, the very early, very successful days of Erasure, of Depeche Mode, Nick Cave, and a whole host of other bands on Mute. And I effectively got poached from Conk and asked by the owner or the person who was running the studio at the time to come over to the studio and turn it into a third-party external studio, because up until that point it had been a in-house studio, and they really wanted to expand the client base within the studio. And so I sort of came over there in order to help facilitate that. And we started out with 2 studios, and that just grew and grew and grew through the years. And at my time at Mute, I must have worked with pretty much every single artist on the label.
That is an amazing. I mean, that is I always Mute, I think, are one of those labels would have kind of retained their credibility since day one, because they were never sort of like what some people call a sellout label. They were very sort of small and credible, and they always allowed their artists to be who they were without sort of intervening too much, I feel.
Well, that's right. Daniel never signed an artist he didn't like, and he effectively, for the most part, let them do what they want, which is, if you have any idea about working with a big label, that's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
There's very few occasions where he'd put his foot down and go, no, you can't do this, or we're not going to do it your way. I must have seen them maybe half a dozen times. And even then, if he was pushed, he'd let the artist do whatever they want.
Yeah, no, this is it's a fascinating story. But so you've obviously, just looking at your credits, you've mixed everyone or been involved with so many artists, anyone from David Bowie, Alicia Keys, Depeche Mode, just so many.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. When you look at it all over the 30 years, it looks pretty cool, you know. And sometimes you have to sort of pinch yourself, and I'm very grateful for being able to do that. I mean, Mute was such a cool place in terms of not only the musical output, but the sort of the control that you had of the studio. And as much as Daniel let people do things as from an artist side, equally he let people do things from a studio side as well. So if you weren't busy in the studio, you were always able to use the studio and just have fun and create music and use all the fantastic synthesizers that we had, and bring your own bands in and record stuff. And it was a very cool place to work. You know, I can't lie in that respect. You know, and I think I think now a lot of studios kind of let their artists or let their staff do that. And Mute really was one of the few places where you could actually just do what you want, literally, in a not necessarily in a literal sense, but in a way of, you know, being creative. You know, and that was the essential essence of working at Mute, is that you were a creative person and you were allowed to do that.
No, that's you're absolutely right. And an example I always use, Kevin, is talking about Daniel Miller's tolerance towards artists. I always talk about Depeche Mode when they became very successful. They started off being not taken seriously as people do, and then by the time they got to Black Celebration, when Martin Gore brought those demos in, Daniel was like, "Hang on here, this is too concept." And the point I'm trying to make is, if Depeche Mode was signed to a big label, they would have been dropped after 3 albums. And had Depeche Mode been signed to someone like EMI or one of the big ones, they would never been allowed to go down the route of Black Celebration and all those kind of slightly off the wall directions.
Absolutely, no, totally, and that's, again, that's Daniel's credit there.
Okay, well, so you on a day-to-day basis, just tell us what, I mean, do you do mixing and mastering?
Mixing and mastering, yeah. If I'm lucky enough, I get to go out in the field and do recording as well. Okay. So a few times of the year, I work in my little home studio here, but a few times of the year I'll go and do some recording as well. But primarily at the moment, well, I've been a mixing and mastering engineer for probably for about 15 years now. Mixing is where I feel that I can add the most value to a project. I do enjoy recording, but I really love mixing, and it's the part of the process for me that, as a creative person, allows me to express that the most. I feel anyway, and it seems to work out quite well. People seem to be quite happy with what I do, so I kind of stick with what you're good at.
Yeah, see, and so would you typically, obviously you do mixing and mastering, would you typically, if someone said to you, I wanted something mixed and mastered, would you do it both, or would you recommend just mixing it, even though you can do both?
I generally work in a way that if I'm mixing your project and you say to me, will you master it? I will generally say, I will master it for you, but I won't master it straight away.
Yes.
What I will do is take a week or 2 weeks away from the project, so that when I come back to it, I treat it as a separate entity.
Yeah.
I feel the lines get quite blurred otherwise. And it's the same if you're recording as well and mixing. You generally say, okay, let me take a couple of weeks off before I start mixing the project, because you just get involved in your headspace. It just fills your head a bit too much.
So a lot of your work is, probably 90% of your work is done through remote these days, remotely.
Yes. And you know what? The internet in that respect is a fantastic thing. It allows me to, well, it allows all of us just to be able just to communicate in that way. And you know what? I think in some ways, remote mixing for any artist actually, I think, is quite a good thing. It allows the artist to listen within their environment, and an environment that they know well. And there's no time pressure. I never put any pressure on artists to come back to me with any changes that they might want or anything like that. And personally, I find it probably better than sitting in the studio with the artist for some reasons. Generally, what I sometimes do is I'll work on a project with an artist and we will do 80% of the mixing remotely, and then we'll go into a studio for 2, 3, 4 days to knock out the small tiny details that we can sit down together and actually do in the room, which can save time as opposed to just saying remote touches over the internet. Although having said that, during lockdown, I'm not sure you're probably aware of it, but there's a program called Listen To. There's a plugin.
Yes, yes.
And that has been fantastic as well in terms of playing pretty decent quality down the telephone line, down the internet, for people to be able to comment live.
Yes.
And that's been very, 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 very helpful, actually.
I think, yes. I think Gareth Jones was telling me about that. He first time I heard it was from him, and he was doing that, I think, when he was working with Emily Tierson.
Yeah.
And I think this is something we also discussed with, you know, because I know like Dave Bascombe as well. He's also doing like almost exclusively just mixing these days.
Yeah.
You know, we also spoke about exactly what you said in a different kind of way. It's quite challenging. You know, with the remote mixing, and this is why I like your thing of doing 80% and then doing the last 20%, because it's those final tweaks that are so small, because it's quite difficult when the artist goes, turn the vocal up, and then you've got to kind of turn it up enough so that it's noticeable. But then they come back and they go, no, turn it down a bit. So, you know, and so I understand that it's that 80% and then doing those last 20% together.
Yes, and it also makes the artist feel involved in the process a little bit more than they would otherwise be remotely. I mean, not to suggest that when you mix remotely with me that you're not involved, because it's your project, and I'm really conscious of the fact that I am there for the artist to make sure that I give them the record that they want. It's not my record. It never has been. And for me as an engineer, I'm there to facilitate their ideas. You know, I bring my elements to it. That's why they want to work with me, and I'm very grateful for that. But at some point, I hand myself over to the artist to say, right, you got to steer me in now.
Yeah.
Because it's your thing.
Yeah, because that's why you hire an engineer. It's for their aesthetic. To bring something to it. Yeah. Well, there we go. So to the guys watching this, if you're looking for well, don't take my word for it. Just check the credits. If you're looking for a top mastering engineer, I will leave Kevin's contact details in the description area below. And Kevin, as I say, your face looked very familiar. It popped up because I was looking to hire a mix engineer a while ago, and so down the future, there's no reason why you and I won't work together in some capacity. So I'd love to
come on over. It'd be great to see you.
Absolutely. Well, listen, let's quickly jump into, as I said, you know, we could speak about so many things, but I want to ask you about something that the community can be really, really interested in. And that was, I think in 2006, correct me if I'm wrong, Depeche Mode re-released it was at that point the 25-year anniversary. And they decided to release everything remastered and to do 5.1 mixes of all their albums. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yes, I mean the package is actually a fantastic package. I don't think I have one here in the studio to hand. Oh, actually, there you go. I've got one here. What was this? This is Speak and Spell, and it's a fantastic package. It's got a remastered CD. It's got a super audio CD version. It's got a documentary about the film.
That's right.
The album. It also contains a Super Audio C surround version, a DTS surround version, and a Dolby Digital surround version. So, in terms of a package for fans, this is one personally that I think value for money wise is very, very good. I mean, the fact that it's on a disc is a little bit weird now, because obviously the internet has taken over pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And streaming has become sort of a norm, if you like. But they decided just to do all of the records in surround, which meant that we had to go back to all of the original recordings and piece everything together. Now, for albums like Speak and Spell, that's not so difficult because there were 16 track, 24 track recordings, and everything that's on the record was recorded, and it was fairly easy to get hold of everything. We just had to double check everything. We had a team of people within the studio environment that were responsible for being the stereo master versus the multi-track, and we were sort of going, is all the vocals there, is all the synthesizers there, is that little odd sound there. But when we got on to some of the big albums, you know, Music for the Masses, Violator, Songs of Faith and Devotion, Ultra, it got a little bit more trickier because those were the times when MIDI and sampling really took over, and obviously the success of the band meant that they could effectively do what they want and spend as long as they want in the studio. And you know, the sessions were huge, quite frankly, and some of the albums, noticeably Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion, Ultra was pretty complex, were extremely difficult to put together. And we spent months sometimes seeking sounds that we thought, oh, we don't have that. Where's that gone? You know, and I think at one point, I'm not sure which album, but we had to actually get the keyboard player who recorded the original sounds to come into the studio and re-record sounds.
Wow.
And amazingly, he remembered what synthesizer he used. He sometimes even had the patches still saved on his synthesizers and came in. I mean, it only took like 15 minutes to play the part because it was a fairly simple part, or it was a sound that went from the verse to the chorus or whatever. And he would come in and just go, da, 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 and it was done. But, you know, we spent a lot of time within these packages making sure that they were as faithful as possible to the original recordings.
Yes, yes. And I just think, Kevin, the size of that task to do what you did, 10 albums?
I think we did.
I think it was
at the time we did 12.
12. Okay.
The last one that was available was Playing for the Angel.
Playing the Angel, that's right.
Playing the Angel. That was the last one that we did.
I see, because I can just imagine, you know, no pressure, because you can imagine Depeche Mode's this band. It's, you know, it's got cult-like status. I always refer to Depeche Mode as an institution. And then you're approached, right? And you're told, okay, you need to redo all this in 5.1. And I think the pressure behind that is the fact that, you know, these songs are so embedded into people's consciousness. And now you've got to bring value to it under the scrutiny of hardcore fans. And of course, you know, Depeche Mode work with some of the great engineers and, you know, the best engineers and stuff. And now you've got to bring something to it. How much pressure were you under?
We weren't really under pressure for the first few because, like I say, we had all the stuff, and the brief was, this wasn't a remix project. We defined it as a reconstruction. You know, we were there to make the surround versions sound like they were done at the same time as the stereo versions. For the later albums, such as, I think from Exciter onwards, we had stems. At that point, everyone was making stems of their records, and technology allowed you to be able to record stems fairly easily back into the computer. So we had a faithful reproduction of those records. But those 3, 4, I mean, Music for the Masses was quite difficult, but Violator, Songs of Faith, and Ultra were very, at times, they were very, very difficult to work on because, like I say, we sometimes went, there's stuff missing. Where is it? You know, and we'd have to go through the entire Mute archive and we'd pull up a tape and it wasn't that one. I think at one point we actually had Alan Wilder come down to the studio with all of his DAT cassettes, and we would take samples off them, because that's how he was archiving his stuff in the studio at the time. He was archiving it with DAT, and we would go, oh, have you got this sample? Do you know where that is? What's that sound? And, you know, I don't necessarily think there was a pressure. I think what it was is that it was an incredibly complex project. I mean, it was a wonderful project to work on for everybody involved. And, you know, the idea that myself personally, I effectively had to learn how to mix like Flood, like Dave Bascom, like
Gareth Jones,
like Steve Fitzmaurice, like Gareth Jones, like Daniel Miller. I had to learn how to be those engineers and producers. And that was probably the hardest part of it. And to be honest, it gave me an incredibly vast understanding of all of those engineers and producers. I mean, you know, it was like a career-long learning session within 18 months.
Wow, because you started off as the chief engineer at Mute. Was it in 2004? Is that right?
Yeah, roughly then.
Yeah.
And the surround thing came about because what I think we were working on a Goldfrapp album, and surround sound as a format was Sony and a few other labels were trying to make it into a proper format through the DVD medium. And Daniel wanted somebody to remix the Goldfrapp album. I can't remember which one, Black Cherry, I think it was. And I said, look, Daniel, this is a great format. I'd love to have a go at that. And he was getting outside engineers to do the surround mixes. There were maybe 2 or 3 at the time who were doing them. Excuse me. And I said, look, Daniel, I'd really love to have a go at this. And he said, yeah, sure. Okay, let's have a go at that. Do whatever you want. So I spent about a week on this one song, trying to get it right in my spare time, you know. And then Daniel did a blind shootout, a playback of all of the versions that had been submitted. And amazingly, he said he liked my one. So I got that project. And from that Goldfrapp album, we did that Goldfrapp album, the first one, and then we did all the Depeche Mode ones, you know. So it was an extremely fortunate, really, to do that. But you know,
how long did it take you, Kevin, the whole project?
The Depeche Mode project?
Yeah.
About 18 months.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Maybe even a bit longer, but it was definitely 18 months.
Well,
I mean, some records 3 months to do.
Yeah, no, I'm quite ashamed to say, and I get hell from my community for saying this, is that obviously I mentioned your name to a few people, and they went, "Oh yeah, you know, the geeks know who you are." And then the next question was, "Oh, Vaughn, what did you think of those 5.1 mixes?" And you know something, I've actually got, you know, the CDs you've got there, you know, I've got 3 of those, but I've not actually, because there were remasters there. Now, just correct me if I'm wrong, but then there were also the 5.1 ones.
Yes, that's correct.
But now,
a version and a 5.1.
That's right. But I haven't actually heard the 5.1s, because you need to be listening to it in a proper 5.1 system.
Yeah, you need 5.1 for sure. Yeah,
exactly. But something that a lot of people have said, and you can read it on forums and stuff. Not that I recommend going onto forums and stuff, but you know, what you did there was amazing. And also, I've had people, you know, sort of, you know, who've got the 5.1 stuff, you know, sort of like ripping sounds and sending them to me and saying, "Oh, Vaughn, have you heard this sound?" And I think with the 5.1, because, you know, with stereo, it's essentially left, right, front, and back. But with 5.1, you know, it's surround as it is. And you've just got, I just think that there are so many elements that sort of have their own space. If you obviously know what I mean. And as people have talked about, people who've listened to the records for years, those 5.1 mixes, they heard things that they never heard before. And one of the noticeable things was, I think, in sorry if I'm getting too geeky here, but in these songs of faith and devotion, people didn't actually realize that Dave Gahan on some of the takes was like shouting, like I think in Walking My Shoes, like screaming,
Yeah,
like in full voice. And although that is not sort of audible in the stereo mix, but I think it does add that tension. Apparently you can hear it sort of in the 5.1 mix, I'm told.
yeah. I think, I mean, surround sound, whatever the format, whether it's 5.1, 7.1, Dolby Atmos, for music, I mean, for me, I think it's a brilliant way to listen to music. And I think if there was a lot more foresight from the record companies, they could almost reinvent how people hear music again in much of the same way as they did with mono and stereo. It's a beautiful way to listen to music. Technology is now allowing us to listen to 5.1 just on headphones.
Yeah.
And through things like sound bars. And I really enjoy it as a medium. I do some lectures on surround sound at Westminster University, and almost to a person, I could sell surround sound audio systems all day long to the students I teach, because the moment we hear stereo versus surround, everybody says, I love the surround versions.
Yeah.
And it allows musicians and the listeners to do so much more with the medium. In stereo, you're always competing for space.
Yes.
Because, you know, once you get your drums in, once you get your bass in, and once you get your vocals in and your guitars, anything else is kind of superfluous to the songs, and
Yes.
you really have to squeeze them in. Whereas in surround, you've got 3 times much more dynamic range. And that gives you a much better opportunity to lay out the sound field. You know, it's not a gimmick. It's not about sending stuff around your head constantly. It's about respecting the music and demonstrating it in a correct way. Because, you know, if you listen to like the early Speak and Spell, there's not so much surround going on in terms of things moving around, because there's not enough elements. There's only 16 tracks on the multi-track, and it's only when you get to albums like Music for the Masses onwards, then there's a position where, as the production developed, the scope to make the surround experience more engulfing, that was when you were presented with those opportunities. And I think there's a perception by record companies that surround sound is only for films and games.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's a real shame, actually.
Yeah, well, very, very often the people working in these record companies and stuff are just pen pushers, and they don't really understand, you know. So we need to educate them, Kevin.
Yeah, I think also, I think it's a lack of foresight, and they're too busy protecting their own bottom line,
Of course.
rather than actually exploring. I mean, you know, it's one of the reasons why they lost control of the internet, is because at the time the internet was born, it was given to an intern to look after, because no one took it seriously. You know, and within 3 years they had lost control of all of the distribution of the internet.
Absolutely.
You know, of their own music. But I mean, surround sound for me is really good, really a great format, actually. And you talk about the fans and the forums, and Depeche Mode, their fans are incredibly dedicated to
God.
the band. And I have read some of the forums occasionally when the products came out, and I would say that 99% of people really appreciated what we tried to do with the projects. There was a few that said, oh, you know, this isn't right, or that could be different. And that's fine. That's fair enough. That's their opinion. And one of the most funniest comments about the records came from someone who gave a review of Violator, which was the hardest one to do, by the way. And they said the fade out on Clean, which is the last song on the record, he said, or they said, I'm not sure if it was a he or she, they said it was 1.2 seconds shorter than the
Oh.
original fade. And I quote, "It ruined the record for me."
Yeah, you see, I've got the saying with people, if you were able to bring back the dead, or if you were able to make crippled people walk, you would still get criticized. You know what I mean? So, but if it's any consolation, Gareth Jones is highly rated those mixes. So
Gareth is a hero of mine. He's
yeah, yeah,
the person that I met.
yeah.
Probably I don't think I met him at Conk, but I certainly met him at Mute, and I met him pretty much from day one. And he's nothing more than an inspiration for me. I mean, Gareth was the original in the box producer.
Yeah.
He was putting records in the box way before anybody else.
He was. I remember I was interviewing the band Mesh. They're from Bristol.
Oh yeah.
They were telling me that back in 2006, Gareth mixed their We Collide record, and they were shocked when Gareth arrived because all he had was, I think it was a G4 Mac.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were like, "Where's all his gear?" And so he was mixing in the box long before it became the done thing.
Pioneered it, really, absolutely pioneered it, and he totally developed and he totally took on the concept of it way before anyone else, way before, and that's inspirational to young engineers and producers when you see someone like that who's going, no, this can work, and you don't have to do the other thing, you don't have to do the thing that everybody else is doing, and he was steadfast in that approach, and look, 10 years later, everyone's mixing in the box really at some point.
Obviously, I've been spending a bit more time with Gareth over the last sort of few months since we've met and stuff. And he's one thing I've noticed about him is, although he's incredibly technical, his emphasis on an approach on a record, probably a little bit like Connie Plank. It's, okay, obviously I never knew Connie Plank, but he's more about vibe. And, he doesn't talk much about technical stuff. When you talk to him, he always talks more about the emotion and things like that. So it's very fascinating.
Well, that's something that I try to do. I'm not a hugely technical person in the studio in terms of communicating with the artist. I'm always trying to encourage an atmosphere that allows you to be creative, because if you can't create that, people freeze up. And I've worked with various people who very successful people who have categorically gone, that's the most important thing in the studio. They've said the reason why I like working with this group of people is because I can do what I want. I can make a mistake and no one laughs at me, no one thinks I'm an idiot, no one puts me down, and we are there to create something, and we all recognize when that greatness occurs, and when it does, it's exactly the reason why we all want to make music and be involved in it. Because it's incredible.
Yes, I think that that's apparent in any part of life. Is you've got to allow people, you've got to allow them to fail. Yeah, you've got to give, because it's that I often find it's like, even in performance, like when I used to play in piano bars and stuff, and it's like, when you're playing in front of an audience, you never play that well because you're always thinking about not making mistakes.
Yes.
Whereas once you've got a following and people know you, you're allowed to make mistakes because people go, oh, we know he can do it. So allowing people to fail is a very important thing.
Oh, well, 100%. I think it's probably one of the best things you can do in the studio when you're, and that's probably more evident when you're recording that idea. But it's one of the most important things for me as a producer to facilitate that ability in the studio.
Absolutely. God, my mind is very blown on the concept of surround sound, and I think it's something that I want to learn later on, but it's something that I think we kind of you steer away from the scale of it. But yes, just a geeky question. It's good practice when you're mixing to keep referencing in mono, keep putting it back to mono. Is that something you do in surround sound as well?
For me, no.
Okay.
No, for me in surround sound, I'm fairly confident with the format, and I'm fairly confident with myself. And I guess I'm at the stage of my career where I trust myself quite a lot with what I'm hearing. And if I think it's sounding good, I generally know that other people will think it sounds good too. Not everybody, and there will be comment, and then there will be opinion, and that's fine. You know, I'm big enough and old enough to accept that, and I want that. I want people to go, okay, it sounds good, but can we do something else? Or it sounds good, or I don't like that. Can we change that? You know, I think as a young engineer and a young producer, the art of taking criticism is something that you have to learn, and you have to have those broad shoulders to go, they don't think I'm rubbish, they just want it to be different or better. And I think with the surround, I don't necessarily, if anything, I'll bring my Depeche Mode and Nick Cave 5.1 DVDs along, and sometimes I've recorded them into my computer, so I have audio file versions of them, and I'll use those as reference tracks just as I would in stereo.
Yeah.
You know, I'll have a reference version to compare it to and go, okay, have we gone a little bit too crazy here or not crazy enough? Let's see where we are with it. So I don't necessarily use the stereo thing really. No.
Okay, no, and I also think it's that, you know, that's an old day with club systems when, you know, when mono. These days, mainly everyone's listening in stereo all the time. But
Yes, exactly,
just a very curious question, Kevin, is obviously checking things on mono is always a good way to ensure that you know, that our stereo mix is actually balanced. Is that not the case with surround? So if you put a surround mix into mono, obviously a lot of parts are going to collapse and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They will do. I mean, we, you know, having said that, we have down mix versions into stereo, so we'll collapse the 5.1 into a stereo file to create a stereo version for whatever purpose, and we might do that to check phase, to check that instruments aren't out of phase. You know, you might use it in the concept of the studio, because if you put up a pad or guitar or drum kit or something, and if you think, oh, that sounds a little bit odd, let me just see it in stereo, let me just see it in mono, you might flip to it, but it's not something that I'd personally generally lean to.
I see.
I use it more to check sounds rather than the balance of the mix. Like I say, I'm fairly confident with what I'm hearing in surround to push on and just go, this is sounding good, or it's not sounding good, let's change it.
I think that's always the challenge as a younger engineer. It's kind of like, you know what you want to hear, but it's getting what you want to hear to come out of the speakers, and that's always that takes a lot of experience.
It takes a lot of experience to trust yourself. I think a lot of that is based around the concept of you understanding your own ability and your own kind of technique. And I think, you know, that only develops through experience. I think some people are incredibly confident and they're great from day one, but most of us normal people, if you like, we generally have to learn that, you know. And I'm pretty sure about that.
Kevin, coming back to the 5.1 Depeche Mode mixes, you said that Violator was one of the hardest ones to mix. Why was that? Is it just because it's such an iconic record?
Yes, it is, because it's an iconic one, and it's one of those. I mean, if you saw the multi-track, you would be like, "Oh my god!"
Really?
You know?
How many tracks?
Oh, there were hundreds in it. There were hundreds.
Hundreds of tracks in each song.
Yes.
Now it's quite funny because and please, you know, we're talking to the horse's mouth here. I feel the source. People love Violator because it's very Kraftwerk influence. They say, and what a lot of people love about Violator is if we take like Songs of Faith and Devotion, and we take the previous album, Music for the Masses, they're very what people I'd like to call part heavy. There's lots of parts. Violator sounds very simplistic, but what I'm always trying to tell people is, and I'm glad you can back me up here, although Violator sounds simplistic, you might just hear one, you might be able to only identify 5 parts in the song. Each part is made up of so many nuances. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. And also the thing about that record is if you listen to the mixing of it, like the actual mixing, it's so detailed.
Francois Kevorkian, yeah.
Unbelievable. I was very lucky, and Francois Kevorkian came over to the studio, and we spent a couple of days together going through the record. And he essentially came over to say what was missing, because we got the records to a stage. I'll give you an example. Waiting for the Night to Fall. If you listen to the stereo version, you'll notice that every 16 bars there's a different vocal effect on.
I didn't notice that. I should. Yeah,
but if you go back to it, you'll hear that the delay goes da 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 da, and then it'll go duh, and then it'll be like another effect, and then there'll be a panning effect.
Oh yes.
Every single time there's a different change, and as me, I had to go, what's he doing here? Oh, there's, and then it would be, and then you would think you've got it, and then you listen again and go, oh my God, there's another sound that I haven't heard that he's got an effect on. You get the general balance of the song sounding okay, but then you'd start focusing in on literally line by line, song by sound, drum by drum, and you'd start noticing all of the detail within that record, and it's incredible. I mean, it for me personally, it's incredible. And that's what made it so difficult. That's what made it so difficult. And I think that's the one I spent the most time on. That took me about 3 months to do. And as an example of how difficult it was, the vocal effect on Personal Jesus, I could not get for the life of me. I tried for weeks to get an exact replica of what was happening on the vocal effect in Personal Jesus, which is the sound of the record. That's the sound of that song. You needed to know that when the person listened to it, they went, that's Personal Jesus.
Can I just quickly interject you? Sorry there, because this is important. So when you've got the parts or the stems, are they all dry, or some of them have? So in the case,
they're all dry.
They're dry.
Everything was dry.
Oh, so this is difficult. So you've got dry stems there.
Yeah.
And you're listening to the original record, and you're trying to reverse engineer the effects chain on Dave Gaughan's voice.
That's right.
Oh my God.
And we had to do that for everything. So, you'd put all the drum tracks together, and then you suddenly realize you'd put the drums together on a song, and then you suddenly realize that why doesn't the snare sound on my version how it sounds on the record? And you've got 5 snares on your multi-track, all playing at the same time, all doing slightly nuanced parts, possibly. One might drop out for a beat, and you'd have to go, well, what's wrong with that? And you would have 5 faders to balance out, and at some points you would do 100 different balances, and it wouldn't be the sound, and you'd be like, this is driving me crazy. But going back to the vocal effect on Personal Jesus, I mean, I literally must have spent weeks trying to get it. We was trying to get Flood on the phone, because he was very busy at the time, to say, can you help me out here? Like, I'm going absolutely crazy with this. And then I'm not sure if he came into the studio. I can't remember if he came into the studio, actually, Flood. Did he come? Yeah, he must have come. He must have come into the studio. But prior to that, I said, look, I need to get hold of Flood. He's the only person that's going to know what's going on here. And I managed to get hold of him, and he said, oh, Personal Jesus, yeah, you've got to use SPX 90, go to small hall, put the pre-delay at these milliseconds, and set the small hall time to whatever it was. And I went, okay, wait there. We had an SPX 90 in the studio, fortunately. I dialed up the preset, put the parameters in, bang, it was it.
Oh my God. So it's like add water and it works.
Yeah, and I was like, do you know how long I've been working trying to work this out? And he was like, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, good luck. See you later. Bye-bye. But the relief that we got that sound was incredible, because once we got the sound, that's it. The song was there.
Yeah, that's true. Because I mean,
to work out all of the delays and the reverb in the extended part at the end of the song. And then I think with Personal Jesus, yeah, you had the main part of the song, and then there's a big vocal section, instrumental section at the end.
Yes.
That was a separate multi-track. So you had to, and then you had to edit it together. So we did the main song, and then you had to do it all again for the end. And then at the end of the song, if you listen to it, if you go back and listen to it today, when we finish, if you have time, you'll notice that again on the end of the song, there's loads of, in that section, there's loads of individual reverb hits, individual delays, individual movements and drops. And we had to do all of that in the session in Pro Tools. We were doing it in Pro Tools at the time. And we had a 9-card Pro Tools system. And we nearly, and it fell over a few times because it just couldn't handle the processing that we needed to do. So then we'd have to go and record stuff and say, okay, are we sure that that's right? Because we were never sure that we got it 100% until the producer came in the studio. And I mean, just thinking about it now, it's making me sweat, quite frankly. But the concept of having to learn all of that, I mean, you know, I've got a knowledge, like I say at the start, I've got a knowledge of a lifetime of work condensed into 18 months, because I had to be Dave Bascom, I had to be Daniel Miller, Gareth Jones, Flood, Tim Simeon, Kerry Hopwood, all of these great producers, Ben Hillier. I had to be all of those producers in the studio, and I was on my own, or working with, you know, some others in the team, but we were essentially all together working it out.
So you had assistants, but this was essentially your call. The sound, every fader move, you were the executive.
Yeah. There was Roger. He was doing all the compiling and editing. We had Kevin, who was working at effects. He was doing all the tape copying and the transfers and making sure that we had all of the parts. And then Roger would arrange everything, because the multi-track didn't have all of the arrangement. You know, the drums would go from start to finish. And then you'd have to go, okay, that goes to this point, cut that out, and then bring it back here. And then, like I say, because they had samplers and lots of MIDI running, some of it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think it was Ultra that we had to get the keyboard player who played on the tour.
Oh, yes.
To come to the studio and go, okay, right, we need this sound. And he was like, yeah, great, no problem. And he, you know, fortunately he had it. I mean, it was amazing.
Wow.
Very, very difficult.
I just had a moment of kind of that wasn't brain fog. It was just kind of mind blown.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And songs, you know, and the Pro Tools system nearly fell over. And then there was another problem that we faced on some of the later albums. Some of the albums like Songs of Faith and Ultra, was we had all the songs and everything was working, but there was something missing with the sound of the sound of the record was not the same. And in the end, I said, I think I know what it is. And I said, I think it's because it's not an analog record that we're doing. We're doing a digital version, but the record would have been made in analog. And and obviously at the time there weren't
emulations and
nothing of that. No, there was nothing of that. And there wasn't SSL, you know, channel strips and stuff like that. So we said, okay, let's get 6 channels of SSL. SSL had brought out a 1U 6 channel of the E series console, I think it was. And I said, let's get those in and run the mix through the SSL, and then we'll put it back into the Pro Tools. And as soon as we done that, and there was a little third harmonic distortion dial on the channel, so you could overdrive the channel. And as soon as we did that, we got the record together and it all glued in. We were like, yes, this is what it sounds like. You know, the digital version was just too clean. It was too open, if you like. You know, it didn't have the glue that the analog version had. And again, that took us 2 or 3 weeks to work out what that difference was.
You know, we say 2006 and you think, oh, that was a couple of years ago, but that was actually, what, was 15 years ago if we look at it now.
Yeah.
So if you had done that project now, Kevin, it would have been easier?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the technology.
Yeah.
Because
processing power in the computer.
Yeah, process power. And also I mean, we can go down a geek rabbit hole here, but you know, the sort of tape emulations and stuff we've got now for adding harmonic distortion and stuff. Do you think we're there yet, where it's indistinguishable from analog?
I think it's just different. I don't necessarily think it's better or worse now. You know, it's 90% the same, and that 10% is just difference.
Yes.
And it's not a case of one's right and one's wrong for me.
Yes, you know, and most people can't hear the difference, I don't think.
Well, most people, you know, the layman, if you like, the listener, just either likes the record or doesn't. They're not listening going, yeah, that hi-hat sounds great. They're not listening to that. Only we are.
Yeah.
Only us geeks. We're going, how do they make that? What's that sound? You know, the people in the street, if you like, the consumer, they're just going, yeah, this sounds great. I love this record. Or they go, no, I don't like that one. And that's based around the vibe, which when we were going back to before, is why the vibe is so important, because that's what people listen to. They're not listening to the detail.
It's also, Kevin, I've often found, like, people that I'm coaching or working with, they will send you the final mix of their song and they go, they want your opinion because they're about to get it mastered. I'll be, okay.
Yeah.
And so what I sometimes say to people is, send me the demo. They're like, what? I said, just send me the demo. And then I have to always break them with some devastating news and say, you have lost something from the demo. The finished product is technically superior, but there is, you know, and this is what I always say, is when you go in, it's that inspiration of the demo, and you're not thinking, you're just throwing things down, but it's that going back and rethinking everything to the point that you end up with a product which is now technically superior, but you've lost the vibe and the emotion from the demo.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. You're losing the vibe, which is the very essence of why you like the song in the first place. And people, you know, we all know what demo-itis is. You know, we've all had that.
Yeah,
we've all had that in the studio, Vaughn. And I think it's again, technology has allowed us to a situation where you can use the demo and it's technically as superior as the finished product, because, you know, even back at 2006, you didn't approach the demo in the same way as you approached the recording. The demo was just ideas, but now those ideas in the computer are as professional and technically sharp as anything that you do if you went to do the actual recording. I mean, that's one of the great things about technology. You know, there's a few downsides, but you know.
Well, there's also the way people work these days is they send to start a track and everything's kind of done in one session. The mixing, the mastering, they mix as they go, kind of thing. And I mean,
I try not to do that. I try to break those processes down. I'm still of that era, where you write the demo, you do writing, and then for me, what I normally do is I do all the recording in Logic, and then I'll transfer it all to Pro Tools to mix, and then if I do the mastering, I take a break from the mastering and do the mastering in a separate session.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, listen, Kevin. This we can go on for ages, but I wanted to, and as I say, I don't want to assume anything, but I had Pino Pescatola on last week. You obviously, and people were amazed how much he could remember from the Violator period. and he agreed to come back on again. And I guess that's just the question I'm asking you is, I know time is important and stuff, but I can tell you what, I have a community here that this is your dead center for what they're into and stuff. And I'd love to get you on again for a more in-depth chat. Is that absolutely fine?
No.
I appreciate that. And I notice I ask you that while I'm recording, just to put you on the spot.
No, sincerely, for me, I'm all about sharing.
Yeah.
I'm all about sharing information and knowledge, and what, I can tell a few anecdotes if that's what people want to hear from me. But in terms of the production process and how records are made, I'm very much into the concept of sharing information, and I've been very blessed in my career to work with people who have always shared with me. And one of the ways that we keep our craft going is by sharing information. And traditionally that was done with studios. Studios would hire people, but that's not necessarily how it works anymore. And there's less and less studios that hire people. And it's down to the professionals, or hopefully us, to keep sharing that information, So I'm anytime that you need something, please just let me know.
Oh, please. The community will be over the moon. And I'm just saying to the guys watching here, obviously you're going to agree with what I was saying. I think I don't want to use the saying, we just can't get enough. Sorry. Actually, I want to ask you just one more geeky question on the remasters now that has jumped to my head, because there's so much. When you were saying, so many questions came to my mind, but I like to let people speak and not interrupt them. Out of all the records that you had to remaster, which one, sort of analyzing them, stood out to you as the top dog?
Violator.
Okay. You didn't even have to think about that. Yeah.
It's if I mean, for me, it's a production masterclass.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Every single thing on that record has a value. There's no rubbish on it at all. And if you listen from the start to the end of the record, when you get to that fade out, which is 1.2 seconds short,
which ruined the record.
Which ruined the record for that particular gentleman. You take a deep breath and you go, "Wow, what a journey!" It's, for me, it's one of the best albums of all time, and incredibly fantastic, and privileged to have to be able to work on it.
Wow. So to you guys watching, all the details for Kevin Paul will be in the description below. If you're looking for a top mixing engineer or mastering engineer, get in touch with him. He's very approachable, as you can see, and the quality of his work speaks for itself. And happy to say, Kevin, you said you'd come back on again, so thank you very much.
No problem.
Until then, to the community, guys, we'll see you again on GeeK Talk very soon. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Take care. Bye-bye.